I stood in the marble foyer of the Bennett estate, my worn suitcase feeling heavier with each passing second, and I knew right then that I had made either the best or the worst decision of my life. The chandelier above me probably cost more than my entire neighborhood back in Detroit, and the woman descending the grand staircase looked like she could buy my neighborhood just to tear it down for fun. Her name was Victoria Ashford, and she was the fiancée of billionaire Marcus Bennett. She was also, I would soon discover, the most terrified person I'd ever met, though she hid it behind designer clothes and a smile sharp enough to cut glass. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how a 52-year-old former nurse from the west side of Detroit ended up changing the lives of people who lived in a world I'd only seen on television. Let me tell you about the day I stopped being invisible and started seeing what everyone else was too afraid to notice. And let me tell you about Victoria Ashford, the woman everyone feared, and how I discovered that the cruelest people are often just the most wounded ones wearing armor. My name is Dorothy Hayes, and this is the story of how I walked into a billionaire's mansion as a maid and walked out having saved 2 lives, including my own. The fear in that house was so thick you could taste it, and I was the only one brave enough, or maybe foolish enough, to ask why. If you're already feeling the tension, if you're wondering what I saw that everyone else missed, then you need to stay with me, because what happens next will show you that sometimes the quietest voice in the room is the one that changes everything. But before we go any further, let me ask you something important. If this story is already pulling at your heart, if you're curious about what happens when someone finally stands up to a bully, why haven't you subscribed yet? Here's the truth that might surprise you. Right now, 8 out of every 10 people watching this video haven't hit that subscribe button. You're here for the stories, for the emotion, for these journeys that remind you what courage looks like, but you haven't joined our Folktalespassage family yet. That changes today, right now. Hit that subscribe button. Not in 5 minutes, not at the end of the video, right now. Because you don't want to miss stories like this one. Stories about real people finding the courage to do what's right even when their hands are shaking. And while you're at it, smash that like button. It helps other people who need to hear these stories find them. Then drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Georgia? New York? Manchester? Netherlands? Chicago? I want to know where my community is tuning in from tonight. Let's build this family together. Now, back to that mansion. Because the clock was ticking and I was about to discover that everything I thought I knew about that house was wrong. 3 months earlier, I was sitting in my small apartment in Detroit, staring at an eviction notice and wondering how my life had gotten so small. I'd been a nurse for 28 years, working double shifts at Detroit Memorial, pouring everything I had into taking care of other people. Then my knees gave out, arthritis so bad that standing for 12-hour shifts became impossible. The hospital let me go with a handshake and a pension that couldn't cover rent in a city where everything kept getting more expensive. My daughter, Lisa, lived in Seattle with her family. She'd offered to let me move in with them, but I'd seen the worry in her eyes, heard the tension in her husband's voice when she mentioned it. They had 3 kids in a 2-bedroom apartment. There wasn't room for me. Not really, even though Lisa would never say it. So when I saw the job posting on a community board at the library, I thought it might be a scam. Live-in maid position for estate in Bloomfield Hills. Room and board plus salary. Experience with medical care preferred. The salary they listed was more than I'd made as a nurse, which made no sense for housekeeping work, but I was desperate enough to call the number anyway. The woman who answered spoke with a crisp, professional tone. "Mrs. Hayes," she'd said after I introduced myself. "This is a unique position. Mr. Bennett requires someone with medical experience because his fiancée has specific health needs. The role involves light housekeeping, meal preparation, and general household management, but also monitoring Miss Ashford's well-being. Are you comfortable with that scope of work?" I'd said yes before she finished the question. 2 days later, I was sitting in an office that looked like it belonged in a museum, being interviewed by Marcus Bennett's personal assistant, a thin white woman named Jennifer who looked at me like she was assessing whether I'd steal the silverware. "You understand this is a live-in position," Jennifer said, sliding a contract across the desk. "You'll have Sundays off, but otherwise you'll be on the property and available. Mr. Bennett values discretion above all else. What happens in the Bennett household stays in the Bennett household. Is that clear?" "Crystal clear," I said, trying not to let her see how badly my hands wanted to shake as I signed the contract. I needed this job too much to let pride get in the way. "And Miss Ashford," Jennifer continued, choosing her words carefully, "can be particular. She has high standards. She's accustomed to a certain level of service. You'll need to be patient with her requirements." "I've been a nurse for almost 30 years, I said calmly. "I've handled brain surgeons throwing instruments and patients cursing me out while I saved their lives. I think I can handle particular." Jennifer's expression suggested she doubted that, but she didn't argue. "You start Monday." That was how I found myself standing in that foyer on a cold November morning, watching Victoria Ashford descend the staircase like a queen approaching peasants. She was beautiful in that way that comes from unlimited money and unlimited time. Everything perfectly maintained and displayed. She wore a cream-colored dress that probably cost more than my car used to be worth, and her hair fell in perfect waves around her shoulders. She was younger than I expected, maybe 35, with light brown skin that looked like it had never seen a worry line. But it was her eyes that stopped me. They were calculating, cold, measuring me from head to toe in the 3 seconds it took her to reach the bottom of the stairs. And beneath that coldness, so quick I almost missed it, was something else. Something that looked almost like fear. "You must be Dorothy," she said, her voice smooth and controlled. "I'm Victoria Ashford. I hope Jennifer explained that I have very specific expectations for how this household should run." "She did, ma'am," I said, keeping my voice neutral and respectful. "I don't eat anything prepared in aluminum cookware. I require my morning tea at precisely 7:15 Earl Grey, steeped for exactly 3 minutes. My bathroom should be cleaned daily, but I don't want to smell cleaning products, so you'll need to air it out thoroughly. I don't like small talk or unnecessary conversation. When I'm working in my office, I'm not to be disturbed for any reason unless the house is on fire. Are we clear?" "Yes, ma'am. And one more thing." Victoria stepped closer, her voice dropping lower. "Marcus and I are very private people. We don't need staff gossiping about our personal business or making judgments about our relationship. Your job is to maintain the household, not to have opinions. Understood?" "Understood," I said, meeting her eyes directly. Something flickered in her expression. Surprise, maybe, that I didn't look away. Then her face smoothed back into that cold mask. "Jennifer will show you to your quarters. Dinner is at 8. Marcus will be home by 7:30. He likes the house to feel welcoming when he arrives, so make sure everything is perfect." She turned and walked away, her heels clicking on the marble floor with sharp, precise sounds. Jennifer appeared at my elbow like a ghost. "Come with me," she said. "I'll show you where everything is." My room was on the 3rd floor, small but nicer than anywhere I'd lived in the past 5 years. It had its own bathroom, a comfortable bed, a window that looked out over the estate's gardens. After Jennifer left, I sat on the bed and let myself have exactly 2 minutes of wondering what I'd gotten myself into. Then I unpacked my suitcase, put on my work clothes, and went downstairs to figure out how to run a household for people who lived in a completely different world than mine. The next few days fell into a rhythm that was exhausting but manageable. I woke at 6, prepared Victoria's tea with obsessive precision, cleaned the already spotless house, prepared meals from recipes that required ingredients I'd never heard of. Marcus Bennett came and went like a shadow, barely acknowledging my existence except to nod politely when we passed in the hallway. He was a tall man in his early 50s, handsome in that distinguished way that came with power and money, always wearing expensive suits and carrying the weight of business on his shoulders. But it was Victoria who dominated the house. She was everywhere and nowhere, appearing suddenly to inspect my work, to point out a spot I'd missed, or a detail I'd overlooked. Her voice was always controlled, always cold, but there was an edge to it that kept everyone on their toes. The gardener, the pool maintenance guy, the person who came to service the cars, they all moved around her like she was a landmine that might explode if disturbed. By the end of the first week, I understood why Jennifer had warned me. Victoria was demanding, critical, impossible to please. She sent back meals because the garnish wasn't arranged properly. She made me re-clean the guest bathroom 3 times because she could see streaks on the mirror. She spoke to me like I was furniture that had learned to talk, and everyone was afraid of her. I saw it in how the delivery drivers rushed to get away from the door after she answered. I saw it in how Marcus would tense slightly when her heels clicked across the floor. I saw it in how Jennifer's voice would get higher and faster when she called to relay Victoria's instructions. But I also saw something else. Something that none of them seemed to notice because they were too busy being afraid. I saw how Victoria's hands shook slightly when she thought no one was looking. I saw how she barely ate the elaborate meals she demanded. I saw how she took headache medication every single day, sometimes twice a day. I saw the prescription bottles in her bathroom cabinet when I cleaned. Anti-anxiety medication, sleeping pills, medication for migraines, and I saw the bruises. Small ones, easily hidden. A mark on her upper arm that could have been from bumping into something. A slight discoloration on her wrist that could have been from a too-tight bracelet. The kind of things that most people would miss or explain away. But I'd been a nurse for 28 years. I knew what I was seeing. And on my 10th day in that house, when Victoria snapped at me for the 3rd time that morning about how I'd folded the towels wrong, something inside me decided I was done being afraid of her. I watched her storm away after criticizing my towel folding technique, and instead of feeling intimidated, I felt something else entirely. I felt sad, because I recognized what I was seeing. I'd seen it hundreds of times in my career. People in pain lashing out at anyone nearby because they didn't know how else to express what they were feeling. People who were drowning and pushing away the life raft because accepting help meant admitting they needed it. That afternoon, I did something I probably should have been fired for. When Victoria went out for one of her rare trips away from the house, I went into her office. Not to snoop, exactly, but to understand. The room was immaculate, everything organized with the same obsessive precision she demanded from everyone else. But on her desk, partially hidden under a stack of wedding planning magazines, was a folder. And in that folder were emails, printed out and highlighted in multiple colors. They were from Marcus's business associates, from his friends, from people in his social circle. And they all said variations of the same thing. Congratulations on your engagement. Victoria is exactly what you need. Someone who understands your world. She'll be perfect for your image. She knows how to play the game. Not one of them mentioned love. Not one of them suggested Marcus was marrying her because he couldn't imagine life without her. They talked about her like she was a business acquisition, a strategic move, a piece that fit into the puzzle of his public persona. And at the bottom of the folder, there was a prenuptial agreement. I shouldn't have read it, but I did, and what I saw made my stomach turn. Victoria would receive a monthly allowance, access to certain accounts, the use of properties and vehicles. But if the marriage ended for any reason, she'd leave with exactly what she came with. Nothing. And there was a clause about public behavior, about maintaining the Bennett image, about representing the family appropriately at all times. It wasn't a marriage contract. It was an employment agreement. I heard the front door open and quickly put everything back exactly as I'd found it. I was in the kitchen pretending to inventory the pantry when Victoria walked in, her face tight with some emotion I couldn't quite read. "The towels in the guest bathroom," she said without preamble, "are still folded incorrectly. How many times do I need to explain the proper technique?" And something in me just snapped. Not with anger, but with clarity. "Miss Ashford," I said calmly, setting down my inventory clipboard, "how long have you had those migraines?" She froze, her expression shifting from irritation to shock. Excuse me? Your migraines. You take medication for them every day, sometimes twice a day. How long have you been dealing with them? That's none of your business, Victoria said, her voice sharp. Your job is to fold towels properly, not to monitor my medical conditions. You're right, I said, not backing down. But I was a nurse for 28 years before I came here, and I know what chronic migraines look like. I know what stress-induced headaches look like. And I know what it looks like when someone is in so much pain they can barely function, but they're trying to hide it from everyone around them. Victoria's face had gone pale. You have no right to speak to me this way. I also know what it looks like when someone is afraid, I continued, keeping my voice gentle but firm. When someone is lashing out at everyone around them because they feel trapped and they don't know how else to express it. When someone is so focused on maintaining control over small things because they have no control over the big things. Get out, Victoria whispered, her voice shaking. Get out of this kitchen right now. I'm not trying to disrespect you, Miss Ashford. I'm trying to help you. I don't need your help. I don't need anything from you except for you to do your job and stay out of my personal life. She turned and walked away, but not before I saw her hand come up to wipe quickly at her eyes. And I knew, in that moment, that I'd seen the truth. Victoria Ashford wasn't cruel because she was a terrible person. She was cruel because she was terrified. And everyone in this house was so busy being afraid of her that no one had bothered to ask why she was so afraid herself. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my small room on the 3rd floor, listening to the sounds of the massive house settling around me, and I thought about everything I'd seen. I thought about Victoria's shaking hands and her cold eyes and the bruises I'd noticed. I thought about Marcus, who barely seemed to see his fiancée even when they were in the same room. I thought about that prenuptial agreement and those emails treating their engagement like a business merger. And I thought about my daughter, Lisa, and the conversation we'd had right before I took this job. Mama, she'd said over the phone, her voice worried. Are you sure about this? Living in some rich person's house, being at their beck and call 24/7? That doesn't sound like you. Baby, I'd told her. Sometimes you do what you have to do to survive. Pride doesn't pay the rent. But lying there in that expensive bed in that massive house, I realized survival wasn't enough anymore. I'd spent 28 years as a nurse helping people, seeing people, really seeing them when they were at their most vulnerable. And somewhere in the transition from nurse to maid, I'd forgotten that my real skill wasn't folding towels or preparing tea. My real skill was seeing past what people showed the world to who they really were underneath. Victoria Ashford was in trouble, and everyone was too scared of her to notice. The next morning, I prepared her tea exactly as she demanded, Earl Grey steeped for precisely 3 minutes. But instead of leaving it on the breakfast table and disappearing as I usually did, I waited. When she came down the stairs at 7:20, already dressed immaculately in a pale blue suit, she stopped short when she saw me standing there. I thought I made it clear that I don't want to see you, she said coldly. I know, Miss Ashford, but I wanted to apologize for overstepping yesterday. It wasn't my place to comment on your personal health. She studied me suspiciously, trying to figure out if this was genuine or some kind of trap. No, it wasn't. However, I continued, keeping my voice respectful. I also wanted you to know that if you ever do want to talk about anything at all, I'm a very good listener, and I'm very good at keeping confidences. 28 years as a nurse taught me that sometimes people need someone who isn't involved in their life, someone who won't judge, someone who's just there to listen. I don't need a therapist, Victoria said, but her voice had lost some of its sharp edge. I need a maid who can follow simple instructions. I understand. Your tea is ready. The temperature should be exactly how you like it. I turned to leave, but her voice stopped me. Dorothy. I turned back. Yes, ma'am? She hesitated, something vulnerable flickering across her face before she locked it down again. The towels. You're folding them correctly now. Thank you. It was the first time she'd thanked me for anything. It was also the first crack in her armor. Over the next week, something subtle shifted in the house. Victoria still demanded perfection, still inspected everything I did with a critical eye, still maintained her cold, controlled demeanor. But occasionally, she'd linger in the kitchen while I prepared meals. She'd make small comments about the weather or ask brief questions about my background. Nothing deep, nothing personal, just small acknowledgments that I was a human being and not just a servant. And I noticed other things. Marcus was home less and less. When he was there, he and Victoria barely spoke to each other. They existed in the same space, like roommates who'd signed a lease together, but had nothing else in common. I'd see him on his phone in his office, laughing at something someone said, his whole face transforming with genuine warmth. Then Victoria would walk past, and his expression would shutter closed, become formal and distant. One evening, I was in the kitchen preparing dinner when I heard raised voices from Marcus's office. The walls in that house were thick, designed for privacy, but sound carried in strange ways. I couldn't make out specific words, but I could hear the tone. Marcus's voice, frustrated and sharp. Victoria's voice, defensive and rising in pitch. Then silence. Then the sound of a door slamming. Victoria appeared in the kitchen moments later, her face composed, but her hands trembling violently. She went to the cabinet, where she kept her migraine medication, and took 2 pills instead of her usual one. "Miss Ashford," I said gently, "are you all right?" "I'm fine," she said automatically. Then she gripped the counter, her knuckles turning white. "Do you have any children, Dorothy?" "I have a daughter, Lisa. She's 31, lives in Seattle with her family." "Does she call you? Visit?" "She calls every Sunday. We FaceTime with my grandkids. I miss them terribly, but we stay connected." Victoria nodded slowly, still gripping the counter. "That must be nice. Having someone who calls because they want to, not because they need something." "It is nice," I said carefully. "Do you have family you're close to?" She laughed, a bitter sound that held no humor. "My mother calls twice a year. Once on my birthday, to remind me I'm getting older, and once at Christmas to ask if I'm still with Marcus because she's told everyone at her country club that her daughter is marrying a billionaire. My father died when I was 12. I have a brother I haven't spoken to in 7 years because he asked Marcus for money at our engagement party." "I'm sorry," I said quietly. "That sounds lonely." Victoria looked at me directly for the first time in that conversation, and I saw tears standing in her eyes that she refused to let fall. Lonely is when you're surrounded by people who want to be near you because of who you're with, not because of who you are. Lonely is when you realize that if you left tomorrow, the only thing anyone would miss is what you represented. "Is that how you feel here?" She turned away from me, wiping quickly at her eyes. "I need to go change for dinner. Marcus is bringing home a potential investor. Everything needs to be perfect." She walked away before I could respond, but something had shifted again. She'd let me see her, really see her, even if just for a moment. That dinner was the first time I truly understood the hell Victoria was living in. Marcus arrived home at 7 with a white man in his 60s. Someone named Richard, who spoke loudly and laughed even louder at his own jokes. Victoria descended the stairs in a different outfit, a stunning emerald dress that probably cost more than my yearly salary. Her makeup perfect, every hair in place. And I watched her transform. The cold, critical woman who'd been in my kitchen an hour ago disappeared, replaced by someone charming and gracious. She smiled at Richard's terrible jokes. She asked intelligent questions about his business. She was the perfect hostess, attentive to Marcus, engaging with their guest, making everything look effortless. But I was in and out of the dining room, serving courses, refilling wine glasses, and I saw what they didn't. I saw how her smile never reached her eyes. I saw how her hand shook slightly when she raised her wine glass. I saw the look Marcus gave her when Richard complimented him on his beautiful fiancée, a look that was satisfied, proud of his acquisition, but completely devoid of affection. And I saw Victoria notice that look, saw something die a little more behind her eyes. After Richard left and Marcus went to his office to make calls, Victoria sat alone at that massive dining table, still in her emerald dress, staring at her untouched dessert. I began clearing plates, moving quietly, giving her space. But then she spoke. "Do you know what the worst part is, Dorothy?" I paused, a stack of plates in my hands. "What's that, Miss Ashford? Everyone thinks I'm so lucky. They look at this house, at Marcus, at the life I'm going to have, and they think I won some kind of lottery. They think I'm cruel because I'm spoiled, because I have everything I could possibly want and I'm still not satisfied." She looked up at me, and the vulnerability in her face was startling. But the truth is, I've never felt more powerless in my entire life. I thought marrying Marcus would give me security, stability, a place in a world that had always made me feel like I wasn't quite good enough. But instead, I've become a performance, a role I have to play perfectly every single day or risk losing everything. "What would happen if you stopped performing?" I asked gently. Victoria's laugh was hollow. "Have you read the prenuptial agreement?" I hesitated, then decided honesty was more important than job security. "I saw it. In your office. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have looked. But I did." "Then you know. If this marriage ends, I leave with nothing. And it can end at any time, for any reason. If Marcus decides I'm not fulfilling my role appropriately." She gestured around the dining room. "None of this is mine. Not the house, not the cars, not even the clothes in my closet. It's all his. Loaned to me as long as I play the part of the perfect fiancée and eventually the perfect wife." "So you're cruel to everyone because you're trying to maintain control over something," I said, understanding clicking into place. "I'm cruel because if I show any weakness, if I let anyone see that I'm not perfectly in control, then I'm not valuable anymore." Victoria's voice cracked. "Marcus doesn't love me. I don't think he's even capable of love. Not really. He loves what I represent. He loves having someone who looks right on his arm and knows how to impress his business associates and won't embarrass him at charity galas. And I accepted that because I thought it was better than being alone. But God, Dorothy, I'm so tired of being afraid." "Afraid of what?" "Of making a mistake. Of saying the wrong thing. Of Marcus deciding I'm not worth the trouble. Of ending up back where I started, broke and invisible and completely alone." She covered her face with her hands. "I've become exactly what I was afraid of becoming. I'm mean and cold and I hate who I see in the mirror. But I don't know how to stop because being cruel feels like the only power I have left." I set down the plates I was holding and sat down at the table across from her, something I would have been fired for if anyone had seen. "Miss Ashford." "Victoria," I said softly, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to really hear me." She lowered her hands, looking at me with red-rimmed eyes. "You're not powerless. You feel powerless because you've convinced yourself that you need this life, this house, this marriage. But you survived before Marcus, and you'd survive after him. Maybe not in a mansion, maybe not with designer clothes and fancy cars, but you'd survive. And more importantly, you'd be free. Free to be what? Broke? Alone? Free to be yourself. Free to find out who Victoria Ashford really is when she's not performing for anyone. Free to build a life based on what you actually want, not what you think you need to survive." "You don't understand," she whispered. "I'm 35 years old. I've spent the last 3 years of my life becoming what Marcus needed. If I leave now, I have nothing. No career, no savings of my own, no prospects. At least here, I have security." "Security isn't the same as safety," I said firmly. "And what you have here isn't even really security, is it? You said yourself that Marcus could end this at any time. You're living on borrowed time, borrowed money, borrowed life. That's not security. That's a prison with nice furniture." Victoria stared at me for a long moment. Then, quietly, she asked, "What would you do if you were me?" I thought about that carefully. If I were you, I'd start by figuring out what I actually want. Not what I think I should want, or what other people expect me to want. Then I'd start making a plan. Maybe not to leave immediately, but to build options for yourself. To remember that you're not stuck just because leaving feels scary. I can't just leave, Victoria said, but there was something different in her voice now. Something that sounded almost like hope. The wedding is in 6 weeks. The invitations are sent. Marcus's entire family is flying in. His business partners, his friends, everyone is expecting this. So? I asked gently, are you marrying him for them or for you? She didn't answer, but I saw the answer in her eyes. That night marked a turning point. Victoria didn't suddenly become kind or warm, but she became more real. She stopped pretending quite so hard. She'd catch herself snapping at me about something insignificant and then pause, take a breath, apologize. She started eating the meals I prepared instead of pushing them around her plate. She started sleeping better. I could tell by the decrease in her headache medication. And she started talking to me. Real conversations, not just instructions about housework. She told me about her childhood, about growing up with a mother who measured her worth by her appearance and her ability to marry well. She told me about the business degree she'd earned but never used because her mother convinced her that career women intimidated men. She told me about the other relationships she'd had, men who'd wanted her to be smaller, quieter, more manageable. Marcus doesn't even see me as a person, she said one afternoon while I was preparing lunch. We were in the kitchen, and she was sitting at the counter, something she'd never done in the first month I worked there. To him, I'm a checklist item. Attractive wife, check. Socially accomplished, check. Good at entertaining his business associates, check. But if you asked him my favorite book, or what I wanted to do with my life before I met him, he couldn't tell you. Have you ever told him? I asked. Slicing vegetables with practiced efficiency. I tried once. Early on, when we first started dating, I told him I'd always wanted to open an art gallery, that I loved discovering new artists and helping them get exposure. She laughed bitterly. He patted my hand and said that was a sweet hobby, but I'd be too busy once we were married. He had a whole life planned out for me. Charity boards I'd sit on, events I'd organize, the role I'd play. My dreams didn't factor into it at all. So why did you say yes when he proposed? Victoria was quiet for a long moment, because I was tired of struggling, tired of my mother's disappointment, tired of trying to make it on my own and barely surviving. Marcus offered stability, security, a life where I'd never have to worry about money again. And I thought I could live with being unseen if it meant being safe. And now? Now I realize that being unseen is its own kind of death. She looked at me directly. You see me, Dorothy. In 6 weeks, you've seen me more clearly than Marcus has in 3 years. Why is that? Because I'm not trying to get anything from you, I said simply. I don't need you to be anything other than who you are. And because I've lived long enough to know that the meanest people are usually just the most scared ones. Tears spilled down Victoria's cheeks. The first time I'd seen her actually cry. I'm so scared, she whispered. I'm scared of leaving and being alone. I'm scared of staying and losing myself completely. I'm scared that this cold, cruel person I've become is who I really am, and I can't get back to who I used to be. I set down my knife, wiped my hands on my apron, and walked around the counter. Then I did something that could have gotten me fired. I hugged her. She stiffened at first, surprised. Then she collapsed against me and sobbed like her heart was breaking. Because it was breaking open, finally, after years of being locked down tight. When she finally pulled back, wiping at her face, she looked embarrassed. I'm sorry. That was inappropriate. Don't you dare apologize for being human, I said firmly. You've been holding that in for too long. You needed to let it out. What am I going to do, Dorothy? The wedding is in 5 weeks. Everything is planned. Everyone is expecting it. I took her hands in mine and looked her straight in the eye. You're going to do what you should have done a long time ago. You're going to have an honest conversation with Marcus. You're going to tell him how you feel, what you need, what you want. And then you're going to make a decision based on his response. And if he doesn't care, if he tells me to stop being dramatic and play my role, then you'll have your answer about whether this marriage is worth having." Victoria nodded slowly, fear and determination warring on her face. "Will you be here after I talk to him?" "I'll be right here," I promised. "Whatever happens, you won't face it alone." That conversation happened 3 days later. I was upstairs cleaning when I heard Victoria ask Marcus if they could talk. I heard them go into his office and close the door. And then I heard nothing for almost an hour. The walls were too thick. When Victoria finally emerged, her face was calm, but her eyes told a different story. She found me in the library and sat down in one of the leather chairs, staring out the window at the manicured gardens. "I told him everything," she said quietly. "I told him I felt invisible. I told him I needed to be seen as a person, not just a role. I told him I wanted to pursue my own interests, my own dreams, not just be an accessory to his life." "What did he say?" Victoria's laugh was sharp and painful. "He said I was being irrational and emotional. He said he'd given me everything any woman could want: security, luxury, status, and I was being ungrateful. He said if I couldn't handle the responsibilities of being his wife, then maybe I should think carefully about whether I was making a mistake." "That's not love," I said gently. "That's control." "I know." Victoria turned to look at me, and I saw something new in her eyes: clarity. I've known for a while, I think. I just didn't want to admit it, because admitting it meant facing how much time I'd wasted, how small I'd made myself for someone who would never appreciate the sacrifice. "So what are you going to do?" "I'm going to call off the wedding." The words hung in the air between us, heavy with consequence. I felt a surge of pride and fear for this woman who'd been so cruel because she was so scared and was now choosing courage over comfort. "That's a brave choice," I said. "It's a terrifying choice," Victoria corrected. "But you were right. Security isn't the same as safety. And I'd rather be broke and free than wealthy and imprisoned." "You won't be alone," I told her. "I know it feels like you will be, but you won't be." "How do you know?" "Because people who have the courage to choose themselves, to walk away from what's hurting them even when it's scary, those people always find their way. They always discover that they're stronger than they thought they were." Victoria reached out and squeezed my hand. "Thank you, Dorothy, for seeing me, for not being afraid of me, for reminding me that I'm worth more than what I can offer someone else." The next week was chaos. Victoria told Marcus she was calling off the wedding, and he reacted exactly as I'd expected, with anger and disbelief. He couldn't understand why she'd walk away from everything he was offering her. He tried intimidation, reminding her of the prenup, telling her she'd leave with nothing. He tried manipulation, suggesting she was having a breakdown and needed to see a therapist. He tried bargaining, offering to give her more allowance, more freedom, anything but actually seeing her as an equal partner. But Victoria stood firm, and with each conversation, I watched her grow stronger, more certain, more herself. Marcus's family descended on the house, trying to talk sense into her. His mother, an elegant woman dripping with diamonds and disdain, cornered Victoria in the living room while I was dusting nearby. "You're making the biggest mistake of your life," she said coldly. "Do you have any idea how many women would kill to be in your position? Then perhaps one of them should marry your son," Victoria replied calmly. "Because I won't be performing in this marriage anymore." "Performing?" Marcus's mother looked genuinely confused. "He's offering you everything. Everything except love. Everything except respect. Everything except seeing me as a human being instead of an acquisition." "You're being childish and foolish," the older woman snapped. "Love is a fairy tale. Marriage is a partnership, a business arrangement. You play your role, Marcus plays his, and you both benefit." "I don't want to be a role," Victoria said firmly. "I want to be a person." After Marcus's mother left, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows, Victoria found me in the kitchen. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. I'm going to need to find somewhere to live, she said. Marcus wants me out by the end of the week. Do you know of any affordable apartments in the area? I thought for a moment. My friend Geneva, she runs a boarding house in Detroit. It's not fancy, but it's clean and safe and affordable. She rents rooms by the week until you find something permanent. Detroit? Victoria looked startled. That's so different from all this. That's exactly why it might be good for you, I said gently. A chance to figure out who you are without all the pressure of this world. Victoria nodded slowly. Okay. Can you get me her number? Over the next few days, I watched Victoria systematically dismantle the life she'd built with Marcus. She returned the engagement ring. She packed only the clothes she'd bought with her own money before they met, which fit into 2 suitcases. She made calls to cancel wedding vendors, her voice apologetic but firm. She reached out to old friends she'd lost touch with, tentatively rebuilding bridges she'd burned, and I watched her transform. The cold, cruel mask she'd worn fell away piece by piece. She started smiling more, real smiles that reached her eyes. She stopped taking the migraine medication because the migraines had disappeared. She stood up straighter, spoke more freely, laughed at things that were actually funny instead of performing amusement. On her last day in the mansion, she came to find me in my room. I was folding laundry, and she stood in the doorway looking uncertain. I want to pay you, she said. For everything you've done for me, I have some money saved. Not much, but I want you to have it. I don't want your money, I said firmly. I did what any decent person should do. I saw someone hurting, and I tried to help. You did more than help. Victoria's voice broke. You saved my life, Dorothy. Not dramatically, not in some big heroic moment, but in all the small ways that actually matter. You saw me when I was invisible. You weren't afraid of me when everyone else was. You told me the truth when everyone else was telling me what I wanted to hear. You reminded me that I'm worth more than what I can offer someone else. Tears were streaming down both our faces now. What are you going to do? I asked. I'm going to Detroit. I'm going to stay at Geneva's boarding house. I'm going to get a job, any job, and I'm going to figure out who Victoria Ashford really is when she's not trying to please anyone else. And eventually, when I'm ready, I'm going to open that art gallery I always dreamed about. Maybe small at first, maybe just online, but I'm going to do it. That sounds perfect, I said, pulling her into a hug. Come with me, Victoria said suddenly, pulling back to look at me. Come to Detroit. You don't need to stay here working for Marcus. Come with me and we'll figure it out together. I smiled, touched by the offer. I appreciate that, I really do. But I think you need to do this on your own. You need to prove to yourself that you can stand on your own 2 feet, that you don't need anyone to save you, because you can save yourself. Victoria nodded, understanding. But we'll stay in touch? You'll let me know how you're doing? Every Sunday, I promised. We'll talk every Sunday, just like I do with my daughter. Marcus didn't even come out of his office to say goodbye when Victoria left. Jennifer helped load her 2 suitcases into an Uber, her expression carefully neutral. And then Victoria was gone, off to start a life that was entirely her own. I expected Marcus to fire me immediately, but he didn't. He barely acknowledged Victoria's departure at all. The next morning, he came down for breakfast as if nothing had changed. I'll need you to start interviewing new candidates, he said calmly. For a wife, someone more suitable this time, someone who understands what's expected. I set down the coffee pot I was holding and looked at him directly. Mr. Bennett, with respect, I don't think that's my job. His eyes went cold. Your job is whatever I say it is. No, sir, I said calmly. My job was to maintain your household and look after Miss Ashford's well-being, and I did both those things. But I won't help you find another woman to control and manipulate. That's not who I am. Then perhaps you should start looking for other employment, Marcus said icily. Perhaps I should, I agreed. I'll give you 2 weeks' notice, starting today. That should be enough time for you to find a replacement. Marcus looked genuinely shocked. He'd expected me to back down, to apologize, to be afraid of losing my job. But I'd spent 6 weeks watching Victoria find her courage, and it had reminded me of my own. "You're making a mistake," he said. "Jobs like this don't come along often, especially for women your age." "Maybe not," I said. "But my dignity isn't for sale, Mr. Bennett. Not for any salary." I worked out my 2 weeks with quiet efficiency. Marcus hired a new maid, a younger woman who looked at him with stars in her eyes and agreed to everything he said. I felt sorry for her, but I couldn't save everyone. Some people had to figure things out on their own. On my last day, Jennifer handed me my final paycheck along with an envelope. Inside was a letter of recommendation from Marcus, surprisingly generous given how we'd parted. At the bottom, in Jennifer's handwriting, was a note. "Thank you for helping her. She needed someone like you. Good luck with whatever comes next." I went back to Detroit, back to my small apartment that I'd managed to keep thanks to the money I'd saved while living at the Bennett estate. And every Sunday, like clockwork, Victoria called. The first few months were hard for her. She worked as a barista, then as a receptionist at a dental office. She lived in Geneva's boarding house, sharing a bathroom with 3 other women and learning to budget every dollar. But her voice on those Sunday calls got stronger each week, more confident, more genuinely happy. "I met someone," she told me one Sunday, about 4 months after leaving Marcus. "His name is David. He's a teacher. He has no idea who Marcus is or what my life used to be like. He just knows me as Victoria, the woman who works at the dental office and loves art and makes terrible coffee." I laughed. "And how does that feel?" "It feels like freedom," she said, joy evident in her voice. "He asks me about my day and actually listens to the answer. He wants to know my opinions about things. He thinks I'm smart and funny and interesting, not because of how I look or who I know, but because of who I am. That's beautiful," I said, tears in my eyes. 6 months after that, Victoria called with even bigger news. "I'm opening the gallery," she said, excitement making her voice shake. "It's small, just a storefront in a strip mall, but it's mine. David helped me write the business plan. I got a small business loan. I've been reaching out to local artists. We're opening in 3 weeks, and Dorothy, I want you here. I want you at the opening. Please say you'll come." "Of course I'll be there," I promised. I wouldn't miss it for the world. The gallery opening was everything Victoria had dreamed it would be. The space was small but beautiful, filled with vibrant paintings and sculptures from artists who'd never had a chance to show their work before. Victoria moved through the crowd with confidence and grace, not the performed grace of her time with Marcus, but something real and earned. David stood beside her, a kind-faced man with warm eyes who looked at Victoria like she hung the moon. And when she introduced me to him, she said, "This is Dorothy. She's the woman who saved my life." "I didn't save your life," I said, embarrassed. "I just reminded you that you were worth saving." "Same thing," Victoria said, hugging me tight. Later that night, after the crowd had left and we were helping clean up, Victoria turned to me. "I need to tell you something," she said. "I ran into Marcus last month, at a restaurant. He was there with his new fiancée." "How did that feel?" Victoria smiled. It felt like looking at a life that belonged to someone else. He didn't even recognize me at first. I was in jeans and an art gallery t-shirt, my hair pulled back, no makeup. When he finally realized who I was, he looked almost sorry for me, like I'd made this terrible mistake walking away from him. "And what did you say?" I told him I hoped he'd be very happy. And I meant it. Because I am happy, Dorothy. Genuinely, authentically happy for the first time in years. I'm not rich. I'm not living in a mansion. But I'm free. I'm myself. And that's worth more than all the security in the world. I looked around the little gallery, at the art on the walls and the evidence of Victoria's dreams coming true, and I felt something settle in my chest. Pride. Not for anything I'd done, but for who Victoria had become. "We all feared the billionaire's fiancé," I said quietly. "Everyone who worked in that house. Everyone who came into contact with you. We were all afraid. But you weren't the villain of that story, Victoria. You were just someone who'd forgotten she had a choice. And you reminded me, she said. You weren't afraid of me. You saw past the cruelty to the fear underneath. You treated me like a person worth saving. You were always worth saving, I told her. You just needed to believe it yourself. That was 3 years ago. Today, Victoria's gallery is thriving. She and David got married in a small ceremony surrounded by real friends, people who love them for who they are. She still calls me every Sunday, and sometimes I call her on Wednesdays too, just because my daughter Lisa and her family moved back to Detroit last year, and I get to see my grandchildren every week. And sometimes, when I'm folding laundry or preparing dinner or doing all the ordinary things that make up a life, I think about those weeks in the Bennett mansion. I think about how everyone was so afraid of Victoria that they never stopped to ask why she was so cruel. I think about how easy it is to judge people without trying to understand them. I think about how the cruelest people are often just the most wounded ones, lashing out because they don't know how else to express their pain. And I think about how sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose to see someone, really see them, even when everyone else has decided they're not worth the effort. Victoria wasn't a villain. She was just a woman who'd forgotten she had the power to choose her own life. And all I did was remind her. The rest, all the courage it took to walk away from security and choose freedom. All the strength it took to rebuild her life from scratch. All the growth it took to become someone she could be proud of. That was all her. That's the thing about transformation. Nobody can do it for you. But sometimes, all we need is one person who believes we're worth the effort. One person who sees us even when we're at our worst. One person who reminds us that we have a choice. I was that person for Victoria. And in helping her find her courage, I remembered my own. Because at the end of the day, we're all just trying to survive in a world that tells us we're not enough. Some of us survive by making ourselves small. Some of us survive by making ourselves cruel. But the real victory isn't in survival. The real victory is in choosing to live authentically, even when it's terrifying, even when it costs us everything we thought we needed. Victoria chose herself, and in doing so, she taught me that it's never too late to choose yourself too. That's the story of how a maid changed a billionaire's fiancée's life. But really, it's the story of how two women saved each other by refusing to be afraid of the truth. And that truth is simple. You are always worth more than what you can offer someone else. You are always worth saving. You always have a choice. And sometimes, choosing yourself is the bravest thing you can do.